Hey guys, welcome back to new video, and in this video we're going to learn about clean architecture pattern. So what is clean architecture? Clean architecture is a software design pattern which emphasizes separation of concern. It makes your code base more robust, more testable, scalable and maintainable. Each layer has a specific roles and responsibility and a very clear boundary. In Android, typically we are having three different layers: data layer, domain layer and presentation layer. Now let's talk about these layers. What are their roles and responsibilities? So first let's talk about data layer. So in data layer we actually get the data either from remote data source or local data source. Once we receive the data, we eventually transfer those data to our domain layer, and in domain layer we are having our business logic. Once we perform our business logic, then we are having another data, and this data will eventually transfer to our presentation layer, and the responsibility of presentation layer is to present data. So it will eventually show you the information, the data. Now in this video we're gonna create complete note taking app with the help of clean architecture pattern. Also we're gonna see clean architecture pattern with respect to car factory analogy. Now what is car factory analogy? So suppose you have a car factory and you want to create a car. In order to create a car, we require three different things. We require supplier who eventually supply the raw material. Then you are having your engineering team who perform R&D and create the components that you want to use in your car. And lastly, we are having our assembly team who assemble all the components and eventually provide that car to the showroom. So this analogy I'm gonna use to tell you what is clean architecture. So this is a very interesting video. Let's get started without wasting any time. So first go to the description box. You can find my GitHub repository link, download the project and open up into your Android Studio. So basically I gave you all the dependencies that we will use in this project. So first let me create the layers. So first we are having here data layer, then we are having here domain layer, and lastly we are having here presentation layer. So first let's begin with data layer. So responsibility of data layer is to get data either from remote data source or the local data source. In our project we're gonna consume a local database. So for that I'm having a package, and package name would be local, and in this local I'm gonna create my room database. But for that first we require entity that we want to store into the database. So let's begin with our entity. This is a data class and I'm gonna call this note entity. On the top I'm going to use here entity notation. Requirement is table name. So for that we are having here const val naming notes table, and in this entity I'm going to use my notes table. Now it's time to begin with our note entity data class. So first we are having id, type is integer, value is 0. Next we are having title, lastly we are having description, and that's it. Now I want to make a primary key. So in order to make a primary key I'm going to use here primary key annotation. Auto generate is true, and I want to change the column name. So for that we are having here column info. This column name would be id. I'm gonna copy this thing and paste in front of my title and description. So for the title I'm gonna use title column name. For the description I'm gonna use here description column name. Now in this I'm gonna create an empty constructor. So for that we are having constructor this, and requirement of this is id. So first let's pass 0 in place of id. For title I'm gonna use empty string. For description I'm gonna use empty string. This is our entity. Now let's begin with our database. I'm gonna create a class and call this note database. This is an abstract class and this will extend room database. In order to make this database, you can use here database annotation entities. You can pass your note entity that you want to store in this. Database version is 1. This contain a companion object function get instance, and I'm gonna pass here context. This will eventually gives back notes database. You can use here room database builder. Pass your context. Next you have to pass the type. So note database class.java, and lastly I'm gonna pass my database name. So for that we are having here note database constants, and I'm gonna call this notes db. Simply copy this notes database, come back over here and paste it, lastly build it. This is our initial setup for the notes database. Now it's time to create data access object, which eventually used to access our database and perform CRUD operation. In the local I'm gonna create an interface, and the interface name would be notes data access object. So in order to make this thing DAO, you can use here DAO annotation. Now in this first I want to perform insert, suspend function insert, pass note entity, and in this we are having on conflict. So for that I'm using replace. So basically if you are passing the same id which already existing in the database, it will simply replace the previous note entity with the newer one, and this will return back long. For the update we are having suspend function naming update, and you can pass your note entity, it will return integer. Similarly we are having here delete. So in the delete we are having suspend function naming delete, pass your note entity, again it gives back integer. Lastly, I'm gonna write a query to get back all the information which is present in your local database. So select asterisk from nodes, function get all nodes, and this will gives me flow that has a list of node entity in it. So this is our data access object. Now it's time to implement this in nodes DAO. So for that, go back to your nodes database, and here on the bottom I'm gonna create an abstract function get nodes DAO, and this will eventually return me nodes data access object. Now I'm gonna write my dependency injection module. So for that, we are having one more package naming di, and in this I'm having an object, and the object name would be nodes data module, and on the top we are having here not insert, we are having here install in, and I'm gonna install this thing in singleton component. This is a module, so you can use here module annotation. Now I'm gonna provide my database first, so provide, and also I want to make this singleton function provide database, and the requirement of this thing would be application context, and this will gives back node database return nodes database dot get instance context. So this will give me nodes database. Now it's time to return the implementation of our node data access object. So for that, we are having here provide nodes DAO. Requirement is nodes database, and this will gives back node DAO return nodes database dot get nodes DAO. So we are pretty much done for the time being in our data layer. Now it's time to begin with our domain layer. As I already discussed, in our domain layer we are having our business logic. So if we're talking about our car analogy, so in the car analogy we are having design and engineering team which represent a domain layer. Now this design and engineering team requires some raw material from the supplier. So supplier will eventually represent the data layer. As a design and engineering team, we should write a contract that this is my requirement, and we should simply pass that contract to the supplier, and supplier will give me the things that we want. So here in domain layer we are having a repository. It's a kind of a contract, and this repository implementation will be given by the data layer, because data layer is our supplier of our data. Let's do that. So in our domain layer we are having a repository. You can consider this as a contract that is implemented by our data layer. In the repository, I'm gonna create a node repository interface, and in this we are having functions. So basically this is my requirement. First is insert, and I want to insert my node. This node is eventually present in our domain layer. We can't access the node entity which is present in the data layer, because data layer has a different domain that is purely belong to the supplier side, and we don't directly touch the supplier's things. Supplier will know about the requirement from the design and engineering team, in this case from domain layer, and once you get the requirement, it simply fulfill that requirement. So due to that reason, domain layer cannot access a single thing from the data layer. Make this thing as a node. Now in the domain layer we are having package naming model, and in the model I'm having data class, and this data class name would be node. In this we are having pretty much same the ID, then we are having title, then we are having our description. Alright, so now go to your nodes repository and insert this node. Similarly for the update, similarly for the delete, and lastly get all nodes. This will eventually return me flow which is coming from coroutine flow list of nodes. So now this is my requirement, and this requirement will be fulfilled by our supplier, or in our case data layer. So in our data layer we are having one more package for the repository implementation, and in this repository I'm gonna create a class, and this class name would be nodes repo implementation. So this is a class, and this class will eventually extend my remote repository, not extend but implement. So control I, implement all the functions, and in order to implement all the functions we require here my node data access object. In place of insert, I'm gonna use my nodes.insert. You can pass your node, but the requirement of nodes insert function would be node entity. So let's write a mapper class which eventually map this node into node entity. So in the data I'm having a package, and this package is actually called mappers that contain a simple file. That's it. Now go back to your nodes repository implementation, and in place of insert you can use your node to node entity. Similarly for the update, I'm gonna use my nodes update, pass my node, convert this thing into node entity. Similarly for the delete, I'm gonna do the same, nodes delete node to node entity. And lastly we are having get all loads. So in this case I'm gonna use my node data access object get all load, map this thing, so it will give me a list of node entity, and I want to map my node entity to node. So for that we are having here it dot to node. Okay, so this is my implementation. So this is implemented by our supplier or data layer. Now it's time to provide this thing. So in order to provide this implementation, go to your data module and here write a provide function. Provide repository, and the requirement is node data access object. This will return nodes repository. So return node repository implementation, pass your nodes down. So now in our domain layer, we actually got what we want from the supplier. Now it's time to perform some R&D. So R&D means is kind of a business logic in Android. So now let's write few use cases in our domain layer. Now what is use cases? So use cases will represent a single operation. Here in our case we are having insert, we are having update, delete and get all nodes. So these are 4 different operations, and for these we have to create 4 different use cases. So let's do that. In our domain layer I'm going to create a package, and the package name is use cases, and in this use cases we are having 4 different use cases. So let's begin with insert use case. This is a class and I want to perform here constructor injection, private val nodes repository. We are having here operator function invoke, and in this I'm gonna pass my node and insert this thing with the help of nodes repository dot insert. So insert is a suspend function. So in order to use suspend function you can use here operator suspend function. Next we are having delete use case. This is a class. Again I'm gonna use here constructor injection nodes repository. Use my nodes repository, delete, pass my node. So we are done with a delete use case. Now it's time to use update use case. Update. Again I want to perform here constructor injection, private val nodes repository. In this we are having, and in this I'm gonna pass my node. Use my nodes repository update and pass my node. Lastly I'm gonna use get all node use case. So this is again a class. I'm gonna perform here constructor injection, private val nodes repository. In this your operator function invoke. So we are pretty much done with our data layer and domain layer. Now it's time to understand these 2 layers with respect to our car factory and logi. So in our car factory we are having a supplier side, we are having our design and engineering team. So supplier will eventually represent our data layer in this case, and design and engineering team will represent our domain layer. Now if you want to build a car, you will need some kind of raw material. So our design and engineering team will write kind of memo that this is their requirement, and eventually this memo will be transferred to the supplier side. So that memo in our case is nodes repository, because our design and engineering team want these things, this raw material from the supplier. Now once we hand it over this memo or contract to the supplier, what they will do, they will simply implement that things that you want, and after that they will provide you. So similarly in the data layer we are having repository, nodes repository implementation. First they will implement your things, and after that they will provide that thing with the help of Dagger Hill. It's a very simple scenario. Now once we receive the raw material, what we do, we have R&D section, and in the R&D section we are having different section. Like one section is totally devoted to the engine part, one section is totally devoted to the tires, one section is totally devoted to the rim, kind of this. Just like this we are having here use cases, and these use cases eventually use the raw material that we expected from the supplier side. And once we receive the raw material, we're gonna use that raw material and perform some operation, or in terms of chronology we're gonna do some kind of R&D and eventually create our car parts. Now notice here in R&D we are having section, and each section has a single responsibility. Just like this, here we are having use cases. Now each use case has a single responsibility, and due to that reason we are having here 4 different use cases: insert, update, delete and get all node use cases. And all of the 4 different classes has a single responsibility, just like we have in the R&D section. And once we build all of the things, all of the parts, we will eventually transfer those parts to our assembly line. So assembly line will eventually represent our presentation layer, and once we got all the parts we simply assemble them and provide that thing to our showroom. So showroom is a kind of Jetpack Compose where we will present all the information to the user. So let's start with the presentation layer. We begin with our presentation layer. So in the presentation layer we are having our view model. So I'm gonna call this main view model. This is a class, and this class eventually extend view model, and I'm gonna use here constructor injection. So for that we are having inject constructor. Let me import this inject, and on the top we have to annotate this thing with hilt view model. And in this main view model, we're gonna assemble all the parts, and all the parts is our use cases. So private wall, we are having here insert use case, then we are having here delete use case, then we are having here update use case, and lastly we are having get all nodes use case. So first thing first, I'm gonna create a data class calling UI state, and this will eventually contain my list of nodes. Initial value would be empty list. In my view model, I'm gonna create a variable naming UI state. With the help of get all nodes use case, I'm gonna grab all the nodes that we are having in our database, and after that I'm gonna convert this thing into a state flow. So for that I'm using here state in, pass my view model scope, and I want to start this thing eagerly, and my initial value would be UI state. So now it's time to perform 3 more operations. So basically it's a kind of assembly line where we assemble all the parts that we are receiving from the design and engineering team. So if you're talking about this thing in Android coding, so what we receive from the domain layer, we receive only the use cases. So we are using use cases in our view model and perform some kind of presentation logic if you are having any. If you don't have any logic, you can simply use your use cases. So here I'm gonna use my insert node, view model scope, launch. I'm gonna use insert use case, invoke it, and pass my node. Similarly, I'm having here update. So for the update requirement is again node. I'm gonna use view model scope, launch, update use case dot invoke, pass my node. Okay, so insert and update is done. Now it's time to perform deletion. So for that function delete, you can pass your node which you want to delete, view model scope dot launch, and for delete I'm gonna use delete use case, invoke it, and pass my nodes. So we are pretty much done with our assembly line or view model. Now it's time to create our showroom. So kind of showroom means we are using Jetpack Compose to show all of the information to our user. So if you're talking about the car analogy, in our car analogy we are having showroom. After assembling all the parts of car, we will provide that car to our showroom. So here what we are going to do, we're gonna assemble all the things and provide this assembled thing to our composable. So now we will begin with our user interface. So for that I'm gonna create a file naming main screen. This is a composable naming main screen, and in this I'm removing this modifier. Instead of modifier I'm gonna pass my view model. This contain a variable naming UI state. With the help of my view model UI state, I'm gonna collect my UI state in a form of state and store that thing into my UI state. Next we are having here sheet state, which eventually used to manage our bottom sheet state. Initialize with the help of remember model bottom sheet state. Initial value is coming from model bottom sheet value dot hidden. This is an experimental API, so we have to annotate our composable with experimental material API. Below to it I'm having a model bottom sheet layout. So before passing sheet content, I'm gonna pass my sheet state. So now I'm gonna create my bottom sheet layout. So for that, in the bottom I'm having a composable called this form, and in this form I'm gonna remove this modifier, and I'm having 2 different state over here. So first one is title, which is initialized with the help of remember mutable state of empty string. Similarly I'm having one more thing for our description, and again I'm gonna use here remember mutable state of empty string. So these 2 are actually states for my form. I'm gonna use here column. In this column I'm having modifier fill max width, and the horizontal alignment would be on the center. In this here we are having 16 dp padding. Let me import this dp. Now in this I'm having here outline text fill, modifier fill max width, and after that in place of value I'm gonna pass my title dot value, and when anything changes into this outline text field I'm gonna simply update my title value. And also I want a single line, so that's why I'm passing single line true. So that's it for my outline text field. Now I'm gonna create some spacers. So modifier height will be 8 dp. Now again I'm gonna simply copy these 2 steps, paste just below to it, and this time I'm using here my description. So on value change is also contain the description. And one more thing, I forgot to add here placeholder. So let's do that. Placeholder is actually a text which says description. I'm gonna copy this placeholder and paste that thing in my outline text field for the title, and remove this description, use title over here. Alright, so now it's time to use button in order to save the changes, or if you want to insert something, delete something, based on that we will use this button. Modifier fill max width, and I'm gonna simply pass my on click event to the top of my composable, basically to my parent composable. So this button contain a text which says save, and I'm gonna transfer my on click event. So for that we have to use here on click, and in this I have to pass my title. So for that we are having string, then we have to pass the description. For that we are having string and return type unit. Now use this on click over here. On click, invoke, simply take your title value and description value. Alright, so yeah, we are pretty much done with our form. Now in the seed content, I'm gonna use this form. Now in this form, we are having my title and the description. Now here we are receiving the title and the description. Okay, so for the time being, just leave it. Now let's begin with our main content. So in the main content we are having scaffold, and this scaffold has top app bar. So use top app bar, and in place of title I'm gonna use a normal text which says notes app, and also I'm having here action. So in the actions I'm having a icon button, and in this icon button I'm having a icon which is coming from icon.default.add. Content description would be null. This is an experimental API, so again we have to enter our composable with experimental material 3 API. Now here I'm going to check if my UI state.data. Alright, so we don't have data over here. So I think in the main model I have made a mistake, and the mistake is I haven't converted this thing to my UI state. For that, let me do that. With the help of map, I'm going to perform a transformation, and simply we are having here box having modifier, then padding which is coming from the scaffold, fill max size. We are having here content alignment on the center, and in this we are having a text which says nothing found. Alright, so this is for the empty one. Now if it is not empty, for that scenario I'm gonna use lazy column, and in this lazy column I'm having a modifier. So modifier padding is again coming from the scaffold, and I'm gonna consume all of the size that we have. In this we are having items, so make sure to use item that has a list as a parameter. Use UI state data, and in this you can build your list item. So for that I'm having here card, and this card is actually having a modifier. So I'm gonna give padding of from the horizontally, and for the vertically I'm gonna use here 4dp, and in this I'm having a row. So this row is actually having modifier fill max width, and also it's a vertical alignment on the center. So in this we are having a column, and this column is actually having a weight of 1, and in this we are having my first text which is it dot. First we are having title, then again I'm having a spacer having modifier, height would be 4dp. Just below to it we are having one text for the description, and for this description we are having a style that is coming from material theme typography, body medium is fine. Just like this we are having here in the title style coming from material theme typography, headline small, and also I want to make this thing bold. So for that we are having font weight bold. So that's it for the column. Now next we are having here an icon button which actually used to delete the item. So in this we are having again an icon, icons default delete. Content description would be null, and in place of tint I'm gonna use here color red. So when user click onto this icon button, we're gonna use my view model and delete that item. So here we are having a view model, then we are having here delete, and you can simply pass your note. So that's it for the delete. So yeah, we are pretty much done with our lazy column. Now go to your seed content. So here we are having our seed content. When user click to the save, we eventually update or insert a new item to our database. So in order to decide whether we should update or insert a new item, we have to create here few states. So first state would be edit note. Remember, we are having a mutable state of note, and in this note I'm gonna pass my id -1, title is empty, and description is also empty. And also I'm having one more flag which actually tell us whether this is a editing environment or the new insertion environment. So we are having here remember mutable state of false. Initially it would be false. Now when user click to our card item, that means he want to perform some kind of edit operation. So for that, first go to your card and attach a on clickable event. So in our modifier we are having here clickable. Once user click to our item, I'm gonna update my is edit value from false to true, and also I'm gonna use here edit note value to be the current item which user click on. Now I'm gonna pass this edit note to my form. So go to the sheet content over here and just control click onto the form. And here I'm gonna receive the note. In our form, I'm gonna create a launch effect, and this launch effect will eventually checks whether our note.id, if it is not equal to -1, that means we have to perform some editing operation, and due to that reason our title value should be updated with note title, and our description dot value is updated with our note dot description. Go to the sheet content. Here we are having form, so in place of form you should use here small braces, and in place of note you can pass your edit note dot value. If our is edit value is true, that means we want to perform some kind of updation, and due to that scenario I'm gonna use your ViewModel update, and you can simply pass your note. So for note, let's create a note over here, and in this note I'm gonna use my edit note value dot id, and title is coming from lambda and description is also coming from lambda. Simply pass this note and it will eventually update the things. Else if we are not updating the things, we simply use view model, perform insert, and this time I'm having a new note, and this note is coming from our domain model. You can pass your id, so id you can just pass gibberish 0, title you can pass, description you can pass. Now simply perform the insert. Okay, so after performing this kind of operation, what we gonna do, we gonna use sheet state and simply hide the bottom sheet. So in order to hide the bottom sheet, we require scope here, because hide is a suspendable function. So for that we are having here scope, remember 14 scope, and use your scope over here. So scope dot launch, and cut this thing out, paste it over here. Alright, so now it's time to use this main screen in my main activity. So open up your main activity. So in the main activity I'm gonna create my view model first. So view model, with the help of field to view model, I'm gonna initialize my main view model, and simply use main screen, pass my view model, and on the top we should use here Android entry point, because we're gonna use hilt here to create my view model. Due to that reason, this is the requirement. And one more thing, now it's time to set up Dagger Hill for my project. So we have to create a base application class, and this class will eventually extend application, and on the top we are having hilt Android app. Now register this base application to your manifest. So open up your manifest, and here use name and register your base application. So in our icon button, the plus icon button that we are having on the top application bar, here I'm gonna write something. So when user click to this button, I'm gonna use scope.launch, and with the help of sheet state I'm gonna show my bottom sheet. And one more thing, in our card item we are having clickable. So when user click onto it, I'm gonna show my bottom sheet. So for that we are having here scope.launch, and with the help of sheet state I'm gonna show my bottom sheet. And on the top we are having model bottom sheet layout, and in this model bottom sheet layout I'm gonna use modifier and take some safe content padding. And yeah, we are pretty much done. Now it's time to execute this application. So this is our application. When we click onto the plus, we are having this bottom sheet. Now I'm gonna type some gibberish in the title and description and save it. So here we go, this is our item, and if you want to update this thing, simply click on it, type some gibberish, again update it, it will update it, and when you click this delete icon button, it will delete that thing. But our list item is not looking very good. So for that, in our card I'm gonna simply capture its padding and give this padding to my row, and here in our card I'm gonna use padding and only take 8 dp of padding. Now it's time to re-execute our application. Again I'm gonna save a note, so some gibberish over here to save it. Yeah, this will look more better. So yeah, this is all for the note taking application. Now it's time to understand this presentation layer. Now we're gonna relate this complete clean architecture project with respect to car factory analogy. So in car factory, we are having 3 steps to create a car. First, we are having the supplier who supplies the raw material. Then we are having our engineering team who do the R&D and create our component. Eventually this component will be aggregated by the help of assembly line. So assembly line is a kind of presentation layer. Let's understand this clean architecture project with respect to this flow. So first, engineering team want raw material. For that they will create a contract, and this contract goes to the supplier, and supplier will supply the raw material. Now relate this thing with our clean architecture. So in clean architecture we are having domain layer. So domain layer represent engineering team, data layer layer representing supplier and presentation layer will eventually represent the assembly line. So first in domain layer, we will create our contract and the contract is repository. So in our project, we are having nodes repository and this repository implemented by our data layer. That means once we create a contract, we go to the supplier, hand it over to him, and they will provide us raw material. Just like this, in domain layer, we write a repository, goes to the data layer implement the repository and eventually provide that repository from Dagger Hill. And once we receive the raw material, we go to the R&D, and in R&D we are having different section. Like one section is actually devoted to the engine, one section is totally devoted to the maintaining tire and other stuff. Just like this, we are having section. That means all the section has a single responsibility. Like this, when we're talking about domain layer, in domain layer we are having use cases. Now these use cases has a single responsibility. In our project, we are having insert, we are having delete, we are having update and get all node. Like this, these are basically representing a car component, okay? And this car component goes over to the presentation layer. Presentation layer, in our car analogy, we will call that thing assembly line, where all of the component will be assembled, and lastly finished product will go to the showroom. Here we are having presentation layer that receive all the use cases kind of components, and this component will be used in our view model. So view model is a kind of assembly line who takes all the components and attach all the components and eventually create a car. Here we are having main view model that eventually take all of the use cases and use according to their requirement. And lastly, once we're done with the assembly line, we go to the showroom. So here showroom is our composable, which eventually used to show the data to our user. So this is our car factory analogy, and this is our clean architecture. So you can relate clean architecture like this.